There's a strange irony unfolding in the American food system, and I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts. In early 2026, the new dietary guidelines were released, and the message was Americans need more protein. At the exact same time, we saw beef prices climbing. So parents were told what was best to feed their family, but then handed a grocery bill that made that harder to follow. That contradiction isn't accidental, in my opinion. Beef prices aren't high because Americans were just told to eat more steak, although the timing is rather convenient, don't you think? Apparently they're high because the U.S. cattle herd is at its lowest level in roughly 70 years as the result of drought, rising feed costs, and thin margins, and maybe some other political forces like attorney generals who are suing local farmers, or the Bloomberg philanthropies funded SEIC operating in 11 Democratic states through the AG offices representing coordination of environmental litigation in the name of climate change. But rebuilding a cattle herd takes time, like 2 to 3 years minimum. At the same time, beef processing is highly concentrated. Did you know that just 4 companies control the vast majority of U.S. beef processing? That creates a bottleneck, or also called an oligopoly. The oligarchy, as Bernie Sanders would say. Well, ranchers get squeezed on price, and consumers pay more at the store. So when prices rise, importing beef is presented as the solution. And in late 2025, the U.S. expanded beef imports from Argentina. The idea was simple, or at least presented as such. More supply should mean lower prices, but the math doesn't math. Even a large increase in Argentine beef adds less than 1% of the total U.S. supply, not enough to lower prices in any meaningful way. What imports do accomplish is political cover. It makes it look like something is being done. Wink, wink. But families don't feel relief at the checkout. And from the podcasts that I've listened to, our ranchers don't feel very supported. So the paradox remains. Here's where things get even more confusing. While protein gets more expensive, grain production is at record highs. Corn, wheat, soy. Grains are abundant and cheap. But remember, in the U.S., we're hard-pressed to find whole grains. Most of what fills the modern grocery cart isn't whole anymore. It's refined. That means the bran was removed, the germ was removed, leaving mostly starch. These are the cheapest foods, and they're the very foods that we need to limit. Have you seen the new food pyramid? Well, families now feel stuck between cost and health. And this tension isn't anything new. If it feels like we're living in a constant state of confusion around food, you're not imagining it. It's because there's multiple systems with completely different goals who are all talking at the same time. And families are expected to reconcile this on their own. This is one reason why I created Freedom Kitchen. Let's look at 4 systems shaping the messaging in this country because they are not aligned. First, there's the health system, and I'm referring to functional health, not big pharma. Let's just consider for a moment biology. It's asking a real question. What does the human body actually need to function well? And that's why protein is being emphasized now and why refined grains are being reduced. Because chronic disease was on the rise with concerns about blood sugar regulation, muscle loss, and metabolic diseases. But I digress. From a physiological standpoint, this part makes sense. But then there's our agriculture system, and it speaks a completely different language. It's optimized for yield, for shelf stability, for transport, for commodity markets. This is why we massively overproduce corn, wheat, and soy, because these crops store well, they ship easily, they fit subsidy and insurance models. Livestock, not so much, which is slower, weather dependent, and capital intensive. And it's not something that we can ramp up quickly when something goes sideways. So the food that we grow most is not the food that our body needs the most. So this can cause a mismatch between what we grow and what we need. And then there's the economic and industrial system. This system doesn't ask what keeps our families healthy. It asks what sells, scales, and lasts. Refined grains win in that system. They're cheap inputs. They're highly profitable, and they can be fortified and nefariously marketed as nutritious. Protein, especially whole food protein, is harder. It's perishable, it's more expensive to handle, and it's harder to standardize. It's far less profitable at scale. So the marketplace pushes cheap calories. And now you can see why the former version of our food pyramid was designed for our economic system and not for our health. Health guidance pushes nutrient density, and now families are left in the middle trying to figure out which end is up, literally. And this is before we layer in the cultural system, marketing, influencers, the diet wars, conflicting headlines, fear-based messaging. People are just confused. They're overstimulated. So when someone says, I don't know what healthy looks like anymore, what they're really saying is I'm trying to reconcile biology, budget, availability, culture, and time. And now I'm just overwhelmed. Is this confusion intentional? Maybe, maybe not, but it sure is convenient because confused people buy packaged solutions. They follow trends instead of building skills. They outsource their decisions and they stay dependent on the experts. Clarity does the opposite. It reduces consumption and it brings people back into their kitchen. It reduces reliance on ultra-processed food and it gives people options. Confusion doesn't have to be designed to be useful. It has to remain unresolved. 100 years ago, people didn't debate what healthy looked like. They saw food, they cooked it. Children watched and helped in the kitchen. Meals followed patterns and seasons. Food preparation was passed knowledge from one generation to another. Today, our food arrives packaged solutions. It arrives finished. The process is invisible, so skills aren't modeled. And without the process, understanding disappears. I actually think we got too smart, too book smart. We've been so conditioned to learn from the experts that we no longer trust ourselves, our innate wisdom. And healthy becomes an abstraction, like abstract algebra or number theory. Here's the Freedom Kitchen truth. Healthy isn't a one-size-fits-all diet. It's not a rule book. It's not a macro target or a label. Healthy is real food, whole foods, simple ingredients. Back to basics, scratch cooking, understanding bio-individuality and flexibility over perfection. When people learn how food actually works, the confusion fades. It is truly my goal to reduce confusion around food, which is why I went from purely coaching to teaching cooking classes. Because I realized something important. You can give people all the nutrition advice in the world, but if they don't know how to turn the ingredients into meals, the confusion never really goes away. Cooking makes food visible again. It helps to make us conscious in our choices. It turns theory into practice. So far, we've examined the paradox of the protein recommendation with the current beef shortage and subsequent price increases. But we haven't yet addressed other sources of protein and the ones that we seem less inclined to consume in the US, and that would be beans and lentils. They're grown in the US, they're affordable, they're shelf stable, and they've always been a part of resilient food systems. And all this debate around our new food pyramid leading with protein because the vegans are all up in arms about the promotion of meat. The new food pyramid simply says prioritize protein, which you can also do with beans and lentils. Every semester, my students learn at least one lentil dish and at least one dish with beans. Tacos, chili, power bowls, even salads can be made with these protein powerhouses. I think it's time that we get resourceful. There's a reason for this quote that says, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." During the Great Depression, families faced similar constraints. Meat was expensive, jobs were uncertain, and feeding a family required planning. So families stretched protein. They mixed their meat with breadcrumbs, oats, beans, stale bread. This is when dishes like meatloaf became common. What we may think of as a comfort food was really a strategy. It was about making a little bit of protein go a long way. Have you ever seen ration stamps? My mom still has my grandparents' ration stamps. They told you how much you could purchase, meat, sugar, butter, flour. They had to become creative. Maybe we need to draw upon that level of resourcefulness. History doesn't need to repeat itself exactly, but when food systems show vulnerability, the same skills matter. Families who understand food don't panic, they adapt. I've been watching the dynamics for a while now, and I couldn't help but notice the conflict of the new dietary guidelines with a 74-year low in beef production. But this is precisely why I teach cooking classes, to empower my clients and arm them with this type of knowledge, along with resources to make the best choices possible. Here's some things that you can do. Use beans and lentils as foundational protein. Stretch meat instead of centering your meals around it. Freeze it when prices are favorable. And if you can buy closer to the source, like direct from the farmer when possible, that would be ideal. Learn the skills that our grandparents relied upon. This is how families quietly stabilize themselves, not through ideology, but through competence. How can I help you? Do you need more protein-centric meal plans, recipes with beans and lentils, finding a CSA or a food co-op? Comment below so I can create classes to support you. Freedom begins in our kitchen, and I'm here to set you free. Until next time, bye for now.